goal as the organisers of this event is to provide the community with a platform, tools, access and knowledge that we can go far and fast together. I'd like to now take the opportunity to introduce our program chair for this morning, or for the day, Mr. Jeff Blackbeard. Jeff is a registered HR practitioner at the South African Board of Personnel Practice. He holds a BSOC Sci degree in African politics and industrial psychology. He is the current Global Director of Sectors and Markets and Regional Director for Africa and the Middle East of Moore. Moore is a global audit, tax and advisory services firm with about 29,000 people in 547 offices across 113 countries globally. Prior to Moore, Jeff's impressive career included tenures with some of the big firms such as Deloitte and EY. One of his current focuses is developing Moore's Africa and MENA office network, and he's also leading Moore's ESG development plans. Ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Blackbeard, thank you.
Good morning to you all. Thank you very much, Devi and the team at DMG Events, and thank you to all the delegates for arriving for this day too, and to all the delegates online as well. I trust that you have a great session with us as we go through quite an interesting program today. I've got a few short announcements to make on behalf of the events coordination, and I think there will also be a safety video to be played. So I will do some of those announcements and we can then play the safety video. So first of all, I'd just like to reconfirm the sponsors and thank them, particularly SANRAL, Cross Border Rail Transport Agency, Africa Exim Bank, ECIC, Namport Railways, the safety regulator, Gautrain Management Agency, PPC, Gajima, Vijay Ori and Associates, and Fustal Arpan. Please, can you at all times adhere to the COVID protocols as advised by the DMG team? And I'm sure those protocols are fairly well known to you as we sit here. If you could also make sure that you have all your cell phones off so that we don't have any interference, because there's going to be quite a few Zoom and digital inputs coming in which may pick up on the mics and onto the communications. As you know, there will be a Women in Transport Awards function later this evening. And please, if you could just check with the DMG team around how you get access to the tickets for that event as well. Sean, I don't know if you want to play the safety video or are you happy to continue?
Welcome to the Durban ICC, where the world meets Africa. As a leading world-class events facility, we make your safety our #1 priority. Please give us your attention for a few minutes to take you through some of the important health and safety information. Whilst here, please help us to prevent the spread of COVID-19 by following these simple steps. Upon arrival at the Durban ICC, you would have been screened for symptoms by way of a temperature check and a health questionnaire. Please remember to keep a safe distance of at least 1.5 meters from other people at all times. Wear a mask for the duration of the event when not eating or drinking. Avoid touching your face. Wash your hands for 20 seconds using soap and water as often as possible. If you can't wash your hands, use the hand sanitizer provided throughout the facility. If you are experiencing any of the COVID-19 symptoms, please contact one of our staff members who can assist you further. As the Durban ICC is a public space, please remember to keep your personal belongings safe and with you at all times. We have many bathrooms for your use around the venue. They are clearly marked in the foyer and concourse areas. The Durban ICC is a smoke-free building, but we do have clearly marked smoking zones outside the main entrance and opposite the concourse area. Please make use of these areas and the ashtrays provided when you smoke. In the event of a medical emergency, please dial the emergency number 031 360 1007 for assistance. The Durban ICC has developed a very simple emergency evacuation plan that everyone must be familiar with. Our staff are specially trained and will be there to assist you in following this plan. In the event of an evacuation, an announcement will be made to leave the venue. Please remain calm and walk swiftly to the nearest emergency exit in the concourse area. These exit doors are clearly marked. Security officers and the marshals will also help to direct you out of the building. Please do not use any lifts or escalators in the event of an emergency. Once outside, you will be directed to the nearest assembly point by the marshals for your safety. Please wait at the assembly point until the venue has been cleared and a marshal deems it safe for you to return to your seats. Thank you for your time and enjoy this event.
Great, thank you very much. There's a slight change to the first speaker on the agenda, and we are going to go straight to the second speaker, as Mr. Motley hasn't arrived for the presentation as we stand. So I'll be addressing the second speaker to introduce her topic shortly. I really just wanted to also encourage you to use the Swapcard app if you're looking at content and looking at other delegates and wanting to reach out for any specific meetings or contacts throughout the session. I'd like to just reflect a little bit on day one. For those of you that were here, just a bit of a refresher. Focus was a little bit more around the road infrastructure, but I think it really had some interesting touch points for us to pick up on as we move into day two. So I just wanted to reflect a little bit on some of those aspects and raise a few questions that hopefully as we go through the speakers and the panels that we have lined up today, that you will get some answers to these, or it may raise some new thoughts and ideas for you to take back to your respective organizations. I don't think I'll ever look at a paved road in the future without thinking of a scorecard of 1, 3, and 5. Tom McKeown has kind of embedded that in my head now, so when I looked at my road driving home last night, I was trying to work out whether it was good, poor, or bad, but it was a little bit dark, so I'll probably try that again on the weekend. But I think it was really important to understand a little bit around how this applies to our daily life. We need to have consistency, we need to have a common understanding of what we're talking about when we're talking about infrastructure and we were talking about growth and evolution. And I think the last question that was asked to Lindiwe yesterday as the panel sort of ended off around, what is our progress on the continent? What are we doing in terms of reporting back the Africa Free Trade Agreement? How are we knowing that we're going in the right direction? I think was a really important question that was asked at the end. And through the course of today, we will be unpacking some of those aspects, particularly with presentations around the Africa Free Trade Agreement and some of the experiences that will come out from the presentation by His Excellency Mr. Salam around the experiences in Egypt. So some of the content yesterday was a little bit more on the technical side, gave us a bit of insights into some of the funding, some of the economic models, some of the infrastructure challenges that we have, but also some of the thoughts around, what does ESG mean? And I think we have this topic coming up on many panels these days. What does it actually mean? We've focused a lot on the environmental issues. People have a lot of concern around the environment, social impact, climate change, social impact, as well as the climate change is really starting to drive some strategic agendas at a board level. We know that organizations are going to be reporting more and more and be asked by regulators to report on their environmental and societal impact, and also the whole issue around governance. And that we touched on a few times yesterday in terms of making sure that we have the regulations in place, that we're able to measure people equally, and that we have the same understanding of what the KPIs are. Because if those are different, then we're all going to assess the roads in a very different way, and we're not going to be able to compare apples and apples. Cape to Cairo is something that I'm really quite excited about, and as we were ending off in one of the sessions yesterday, it was talk about the skills gap and the challenges that we're facing on the continent with transfer of skills, training, education, development of younger people coming into quite senior roles. And this is really something that's very inherent in Africa. We've always had a strong agenda around education and development, but certainly the rest of the world is experiencing something similar, but in slightly different degrees. And the Great Resignation that's taking place across Europe, the UK, and North America is becoming more and more real. And some of those impacts on the Great Resignation are not just in the professional roles, but also in some of the mid-worker roles, and particularly in the US and the UK. We've seen a lot of reporting around truck drivers being no longer keen to do these long-distance truck hauls. And if I was a truck driver in Africa, I'd be also considering very carefully how the future is going to look. If the roads become more developed and these distances are going to be even longer, certainly we're going to have to look at skills and development and recruitment of people. So staying with the roads theme, the skills of driving these long distances and the ability to manage logistics across these vast distances is going to be quite important for us to consider. So Cape to Cairo is a really exciting vision, but implications of it is that we're going to have people geared to be able to manage in a very different way. And certainly the skills development programs and the recruiting of people is going to be impacted as we move into the next phase. I was also really interested to hear about the different funding models. I think, Ellen, you touched on it quite a few times around that, everybody's always calls, for a PPP, but maybe that's not always the best model to go for. Maybe there are other options, and we really need to kind of consider these as to how we are actually funding projects. Because sometimes in the funding, if you get the interest rate wrong or the period wrong, it can make very significant impacts on the ability to pay and the financing of these projects. And these are often situations that we find ourselves as a professional firm, that clients want the project to work, and therefore they are starting to put pressure on the funding agencies as well as the professional service providers to make the numbers work out. And that's not always possible, and we need to guard against that, because there needs to be really some very clear thinking when it comes to the funding. I also was really interested around the concept of the borders. And I think this is something that I think it was Lovemore that dealt with yesterday. The borders were created along the lines of language and culture, unrelated to Africa. And so those borders have created barriers. Sometimes these barriers reflect in the policies we have and the laws we have, and just even the interpretation of different jurisdictions can be very, very significant when you start to move into a wider African context. So the concept of borders is a reality, and the challenges are really important for us to consider, because some of them are very practical. Sometimes these borders are actually a river or a ravine or some other geographic issue, but sometimes it's a mindset issue as well. So we need to think around how we deal with some of the mindsets, how we get rid of all the unnecessary silos, and we make sure that we make our life a little bit more easy to deal with. And I know it's complicated, and there are many political and economic issues to consider, but certainly the borders are going to challenge us as we move forward into the future. I'm hoping that the discussions that we go through today are going to reflect on a few other interesting items that came up just in concept. One of those is really looking at how we're going to not only fund these activities of infrastructure, but how we're going to power them. Where's the energy, electricity directly going to come from for many of these rail links that are being considered? Are there other options? And I know one of the panels is going to, one of the speakers is going to talk about hydrogen locomotives. We've been having some internal conversations about the maritime sector and the use of hydrogen for vessels crossing the Atlantic, crossing the Indian Ocean, using hydrogen. But the challenges of hydrogen, and I'm sure this will come out in the conversation, are storage, the volatility, the availability in certain ports and jurisdictions. So we're going to have to look at all the ways we're going to make reduce our carbon, but at the same time they have to be practical, and we need to understand the implications of transition, because certainly we can't all drop the models that we're using at the moment and adopt more renewable ones without really considering all the impacts that it may have. More importantly, as the infrastructure is rolled out, I always think of an example that I had when I was traveling early on in Nigeria, around about 96, 97. I had a road trip between Lagos to Port Harcourt, and if anybody's traveled that road, they'll be very familiar with it. It's not the safest road in the world to travel on, But there were certain points along the road where there was the pothole had become, in a South African word, a donga. It was a deep hole in the road, and the trucks were slowing down, and my car was slowing down, and we were dropping down almost below the level of the road to go out of the hole. And when I asked the driver why they hadn't decided to repave the section, the comment was that the economic activity generated by the truck slowing meant that recharge cards could be sold, food could be sold on the side of the road. There were many other activities that took place around the hole that allowed for the local community to participate in the economic activity that was taking place on the road. I thought that was really interesting because when I was listening again yesterday, I was thinking about that. If we have these high-speed links between cities and we ignore the local communities along the way, we're certainly going to create other challenges for us down the line. We're connecting a port with a mine or a manufacturing institution, but we're forgetting all the other connections that are normally made along those routes. So certainly we can't throw out some of the advancements just because we need to preserve some of the challenges that have been faced in the past, but certainly we need to understand the social impact when we place infrastructure as a priority, because certainly there are other economic challenges that people are facing, and COVID has heightened those in many instances, and we don't want those to be increased like we saw in July, where the challenges are become a direct assault on our infrastructure. I also just think, as I close off here, around the motivation that we had around the 2010 World Cup. For those of you that were in South Africa at the time or participated in even from an international audience in the World Cup, there was a certain amount of focus on the infrastructure, and we all knew that it was going to be fantastic, and there were new airports being developed. We knew there was going to be a Gautrain. We knew there were going to be new roads being laid out, and there were new things happening. But the vision was actually about the World Cup and the soccer and the event that was going to happen, and that the whole community was involved with that, and the whole global community was involved. I just get a sense that with the Africa Free Trade Agreement that we have a very good opportunity to recreate some of those experiences. If we can get the people to understand why this is important, and it's not just building roads and infrastructure like it was in 2010, not just building new stadiums or a train for people who want to commute in Johannesburg, but it was about changing the way people operate and communicate, I think we'll be slightly on a different position. So I'm hoping through the sessions today, you'll get a little bit of a sense of some of the issues that I've raised here, and certainly if I'm hoping through the questioning that we'll have at the points where we have time available, you'll also be able to raise some of these questions with some of the panelists and over the breakout sessions. So with that in mind, I'd like to maybe move on to invite our first speaker to join me on the stage. Just got a brief bio to read on her behalf. And I'd like you to come up. Eunice, are you available to join me on the stage? Ah, you're coming from that side. Sorry. Sorry, I couldn't see you through the light. Good. Good. Good morning to you. Yeah, take a seat there. I'm just going to do a quick intro. Yep, good. I'm joined on the stage by Eunice Ayambo. I'd like to give you a brief outline of her CV. Ms. Eunice Ayambo is the Economic Development Coordinator Officer to the United Nations on the Namibia UNN. She leads coordinating analysis, advisory, and development cooperation on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, and Integrated National Financing Framework. So a lot of the points that I've raised, I trust that Eunice will also be addressing. Her work spanning economic policy advisory development, finance and economic governance, and the public sector management has been published by the Africa Policy Journal, The Economist, Palgrave, Macmillan, and Harvard Business Publishing. She regularly facilitates lectures and presents capacity building high-level meetings and events that include the Africa Regional Forum on Sustainable Development, AFRSD, the Africa Trade and Investment Global Summit, the South American Africa Middle East Asia Women's Summit, and the Economist Events Global Summit. Ms. Ayambo is inducted on the Global Women Leaders Hall of Fame and she is Archbishop Desmond Tutu Fellow for Africa and a Public Policy and International Affairs Fellow at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs. She received a Master's in Public Policy, Economic Development from the Kennedy School of Government, Harvard University, the United States of America. We're very proud to have you with us, Eunice, and I wanted to read that out because I think it's really important that we acknowledge people's experiences and their expertise. So thank you very much, Eunice, and if you would like to use that over there, and there is a clicker if you would like to use it as well. Thank you very much. Please give a hand for Eunice.
Okay. Sani Bonani, Durban. Is that correct? Thank you. I'm learning. Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. It's my first time in Durban, not in South Africa, and I did the hop-on, hop-off trip around the city. It was quite a lovely experience, reminding me of Singapore, reminding me of Oslo, reminding me of New Jersey and New York. So really, and then the question is, what is it we're doing with the African Continental Free Trade Area and Agreement, and what more can we do? I think all of that is on the menu here in Durban. So thank you that I can be here and speak and really exchange and share with you. So what is really the CFTA about? The CFTA has opened our eyes to the possibilities of Africa. The CFTA has given us work to do. I think yesterday there was a question of we keep talking, but where are the results? So the CFTA is that significant. It's that huge. It's beyond any one of us. It's a part of the Agenda 2063. And then the question is, who's going to be alive in 2063? Well, that's the whole motivation, which is we are thinking beyond any one of us as individuals, and we are thinking about the continent as a whole. But if the CFTA has given us work to do, then it means that we need to coordinate better, and we need to mobilize each other, and we need to have the champions with which we can do this work. So I'm just going to go through my slides shortly, and I think later there will be a session where a point in which they are projected. So the question is, why is this important? Why is Africa doing the CFTA? Really, it comes from economic theory, which is the gravitational theory of trade, which is when you're closer to each other, you benefit from trade much more easily. And that's a contradiction because Africa is the most fragmented continent in the world. You have countries that have 200 million people, you have countries that have 100,000 people. And then out of the 55 African countries, 20 of them have a population of less than 10 million people. So then the question becomes, why is it that a continent that is so divided, the whole point of borders, we are not trading with each other when there are benefits to trade, and trade is a tool for development. And the data also shows that, unfortunately, our exports and imports are the most expensive in the whole world. So then the question is, for a continent has the highest number of least developed countries and least landlocked, least developed countries, why is it that we are not trading with each other? So the motivation for the CFTA is ingrained in trade theory, in development theory. And it's also backed by the motivation of our founders, of our freedom fighters, who believed and understood that integration is a part of the prosperity of the African continent. Next slide, if you will. So why the CFTA? Really, the key motive is the single market, the 1.2 billion people, those 10 million populations, integrating them into a larger market. and to facilitate the free movement of people, which is maybe the One Africa passport. That's also work that has to be done. But if people are going to move, maybe there's need to have those documents that enable that movement. And the point of industrial development, the idea that perhaps for the continent to develop, we need to be thinking about manufacturing as a means to structural transformation. And then the point of multiple memberships in the different trade agreements. So, and then it's not enough to agree on trade. How tangibly then is this important for the average African? It's the idea that whether you're in Lagos or you're in Nairobi, you can choose to purchase your products from Game or ShopRite or any other provider. So the issue of choice and quality. We are saying that Africans also need to have access to quality products and to have the choice to choose from where to purchase. The point of economies of scale, so that an investor looks at the market as 1 billion people instead of 100,000 people. And the jobs that we'll create when you manufacture our own products on the continent, utilizing the resources that are available to us. And then, of course, poverty. One of the numbers that we keep saying is that with the CFTA, we predict to create 30 million jobs, basically to get 30 million people out of poverty. The point I always make is there are countries with 30 million people, so if you, for example, left it would be like lifting 30 million Angolans out of poverty. And then income distribution, which is when you manufacture, you industrialize, you're creating jobs along the value chain. So somebody asked, what has been done? A lot has been done. We have to remember that the history of the CFTA goes beyond recent developments. It started with the Abuja Treaty, and then in the early 90s, member states were working on the creation of the regional economic communities. So that was in the early, it's a vision. People know what they're doing. In the early 90s, they created the regional economic communities, and then in 2012, they agreed to create the CFTA. In 2018, it was signed in Kigali. In 2019, it was ratified and came into force. And in 2021, January this year, trading started. So there's a timeline of events, and people are working. And out of the 55 African countries, 54 have signed onto that agreement. So again, I think Jeff mentioned the point of economics, but this is not just about economics. It's also about politics. It's about identity of the African continent. So 54 out of the 55 countries have signed on the agreement. And as we speak, 42 have ratified. So we call this a watershed, whereby majority of African countries are committing to something and they are championing it. Already, there are different phases of negotiations that have happened and are happening. The trade in goods and trade in services protocol, and transport is under the trade in services protocol. There's also a protocol on investment, on competition policy, a range of protocols under negotiation to ensure that trading in Africa actually does happen. Somebody asked me, why are you here? What does the UN do on transport? So transport is one of the priority sectors of the CFTA. There are 5 priority sectors, including communications, tourism, financial, business services, and transport. So in the trade on services protocol for the CFTA, transport comes out as key. And so what has been and what is going to be the impact of the CFTA on the transportation sector? First of all, transport is not only a priority, but it's also an enabler and a driver of the CFTA. And I think that's something to take away. I think it would be the next slide, which is transport is an enabler and a driver of the CFTA. How is it an enabler? If we're going to open borders, we have to move the goods and services. So that's how transport enables the CFTA. And how does it drive the CFTA? The fact that we need to make improvements for the CFTA to happen, then we are called upon to strengthen our transportation sector. So that's the linkage. And the CFTA really has highlighted the demand for the transportation sector. So that's the other point of the CFTA is opening our eyes to the possibilities of the transport sector, the weaknesses of the transport sector, and the opportunities in the transport sector. And also really highlighting from an economic perspective, potential demand for the transportation sector that is suppressed. So that's the impact of the CFTA on the transportation sector. It is a driver for the sector, and it's an enabler for the sector, and it's one of the priority sectors of the agreement. It's that important. So then what are the opportunities? Again, the opportunities that the CFTA poses for the transportation sector are based on some analytical work that is done that projects that the continent would be growing perhaps at 6%. Of course, with COVID, that number is going down to 4%, but we still think that we will peak up to the 6% level. So with that growth, then the trade that is coming, that is really pushing for that growth, is also expected to grow. And when trade is growing, the demand for transportation is also going to grow. And what we are finding is that South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Morocco, and Nigeria, which account for more than half of African trade, will also dominate the transportation sector. But at the same time, the landlocked countries that we are really worried about through the CFTA will also have an increase in demand for the transportation sector. So that's the other takeaway, which is there's going to be demand for transport because of the CFTA. And I think slide number 6 is where I really wanted to start projecting. So we can see the numbers. There's been forecasting that has been done, and you can see sort of the rise in demand that is going to arise through the CFTA for the transportation sector. Can we have the graph? Slide number 6? Yeah, over there. So this is based on analysis and on data. We can see that trade will increase in all of the regions, and at the same time, all the various forms of transportation, including roads, railways, ports, lakes, and rivers, is also going to increase. So this is projection to 2040. And we are talking about Agenda 2063. So for the private sector, this is it. This is where you don't have to question your demand. And then also the containers, the container traffic is projected to increase across all the various corridors projected to 2024. And one of the points, again, I think I'm based in Windhoek, and Namibia, Mozambique, Gabon are some of the countries whereby the marine transportation is going to be highly beneficial. So a lot of this data exists. And then air passenger traffic is also is projected to increase. And this is really based on the fact that the continent is expected to grow. And there's going to be increased demand. And also for the landlocked countries that are always worrying us on their mobility and accessibility, the projection is that their traffic within those countries is projected to grow at an estimated 8%. So, and then you ask, all right, so that's the data. So what are we doing about it? And I think we are used to saying Africans just talk, they don't do anything. And I want to say that people are actually working. So within, to sort of complement the CFTA, there's a program called the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa. It's PIDA. I think the experts in the field know about PIDA. So within, to complement the CFTA, there are a range of projects that are already underway at the continental level, including the African Integrated High-Speed Rail Network. I think yesterday in the room there was discussion on, we should move cargo from roads to railway. So at the continental level, there's work that's being done to sort of strengthen the railway infrastructure. And there's a master plan that is underway. So for people who are looking for work to do, you can get involved in working on this master plan. There's also the Single African Air Transport Market network. That's also on air transport that's underway. And a number of countries have signed to it, 34 countries, in order to open the African skies. And then I think we keep talking about digital. There's also a plan at the continental level, a strategy to strengthen that sector. And then, of course, with transport, we're going to have to align it with digitalization and technology. And Jeff talked about numbers. So for this plan, the PIDA plan, which focuses on transport, energy, water, and ICT, 95% of the financing for those sectors, 95% of it is going to the transportation sector and the energy sector. So this is where we say you put your money where your mouth is. The continent is saying, all right, we're interested in infrastructure projects, transport, energy, water, and ICT, and 95% of the funding that we are mobilizing is going to go to the transportation sector and to the energy sector. So for people in procurement, I think it's good to look out at PIDA projects and try and see where some business can be done. And then on financing, of course, with the transport and the infrastructure development, you're always having to think about the money. And I think Jeff spoke to the PPPs, and then yesterday there was also the thinking that perhaps we need to think about non-traditional modes of financing. And we do agree. There's, for example, green funds, impact investors, and strategic partnerships. So perhaps thinking outside of the traditional box and figure out what other ways can financing for the transportation sector happen. And then, of course, digitalization, it's a consideration to support and leapfrog some of the activities on the continent. And then another really interesting one is the opportunity that the minerals on the continent provides. And I think Mr. Aubrey yesterday spoke to the electric cars. It is a reality. That mode of transportation provides a market for Africa's cobalt, nickel, lithium, manganese. So how are we going to leverage that as an opportunity? And then, of course, COVID has shown that indeed that connectivity that happens is important. You cannot self-isolate, and if we shut down borders, we do face challenges. I would like to put the slide with the nice pictures, the Sustainable Development Goals, to respond to the question of why is the UN doing this? The UN does everything. Specifically for the transportation sector, trade is a means of implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. And transport is connected. Let me see. Keep going. If you don't show that slide, my boss won't agree. I'm almost done. Oh. Oh, he's allowing me. Okay, good. This is the lovely slide. This is the bread and butter. The transportation sector is linked to these Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG on health. So while you're building your roads, your highways, your airlines, you have to think about accidents. So accidents are part of the health SDG, which is SDG 3. And while you're building your roads, you have to think about gender equality, which is how are we integrating women within the developments in the transportation sector. So this is to congratulate the organizers for the Women's in Transport Awards of this evening. And then Sustainable Development Goal 9 is literally on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And that's the SDG where transportation is fully anchored. And then also on cities, the mobility that transportation enables across cities. And then, of course, consumption and production. We need those roads to work, the railways, for us to access our goods and services. And then the most important one that's coming up, and we just finished COP26, is how are we impacting the climate when we invest in transportation and infrastructure. So I wanted to show these Sustainable Development Goals so that you can see some of the work that we do, the interconnectedness of it. And if there's any slide you can remember is this one, then I'll have done my job. So what are the takeaways? Transport is important for the CFTA. It is a priority sector. It is in the protocol on services. So you have a space, go advocate for it and do the work. But again, as we agreed in the room, it's not about the private sector, it's about government, it's about member states. So they're the ones leading the negotiations on the CFTA. So to expedite the work that has to happen, you need to talk to your governments to ask the hard questions. Are you at the table? And already with COVID, we can see that indeed there are problems. The truck drivers that have been harassed or discriminated against all affect the extent to which we can benefit from the transportation sector. And then, unfortunately, it continues to be a weakness for the CFTA and therefore also shortchanging interconnectivity. We keep talking about the Cape to Cairo. It's a good evidence of what can happen and what cannot happen and the challenges that arise with that. And then PIDA, that Program on Infrastructure Development for Africa, is a master plan. It's a good source of information on opportunities within the sector for the continent. And then the RECs. The CFTA is continental, but there's SADC, there's ECOWAS, there's COMESA. Those still play a role also in the integration agenda of the continent. And then there's something they call national CFTA implementation strategies. My sense is that part of why within the room there are questions about what are we doing, what have we done, is that perhaps this CFTA implementation strategy work has not commenced, hasn't been done. So it might be good to find out, is South Africa working on the national CFTA implementation strategy? And the other reason people are not aware of the CFTA is we actually have to undertake sensitization work. And I'm grateful for the opportunity today because I believe it's part of the efforts to sensitize on the CFTA and create some awareness around it. And with those few, very many words, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eunice. And it sounds like there's the funding is available. It's a question of getting those feasible projects, I guess, that make the real trick here to ensure that we can unlock that potential. But thank you very much for bringing to our attention a number of items. Does anybody have a quick question from the floor for Eunice, or can we move on? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Eunice. Much appreciated. Eunice will be available. So there is a question. Sorry, Colonel.
Good morning again. I'm Andre Cizo, the Secretary General of the Port Management Association for Eastern and Southern Africa. My question is on the issue of moving more goods volume to rail from the roads, whether there's the study that had gone in, the impact, social impact on those activities along the road, if you understand me. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Right. Thank you, sir, Mr. Andre, for that question. Not that I know of, and for people who are interested in analytics and data, it's part of the work we have to do. There's a lot that we don't have data on and information because we have to get the work done. So specifically on the impact of the volumes moving it to railway, I don't know of a study specifically on Africa, but I'm sure if we do the research, we will find something, and we can also benchmark from other countries across the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Eunice. I'm sure there will be opportunities to engage with Eunice as you have the breakaway session, so thank you for your time. We have a great opportunity to have His Excellency Ashraf Salman join us from Cairo in Egypt. I had the great pleasure of meeting His Excellency when I was in Cairo at about the time that they were signing the initial agreements to unlock the Africa Free Trade Agreement from the eastern bloc of the continent. There were agreements being signed between COMESA and Egypt at that point, and that was kind of the starting point for many of the conversations that then led to the final signing of the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And I'm very proud to have His Excellency join us today. It's going to be in the form of a recording for this piece of the session, but there will be time to meet him in person on one of the panel conversations later. I'll read just a short outline of his CV, and then probably as you go through the session you'll understand a little bit more about his experience. But certainly it is important to highlight his name and his background. Mr. Salman is currently the Chairman and CEO of AUR Capital, and a private equity investment company based in Egypt. Mr. Salman was appointed by the President of Egypt as the Minister of Investment on the Arab Republic of Egypt in June 2014 until March 2016. The Minister's mandate included directly to supervise the Central Authority of Investment and with the state-owned companies under the law number 203 of 1991. He played a key role in the discussions around the investments that would need to be made by the Egyptian government in preparing for the free trade implementation and practical implementation. He has, over the past 20 years of experience in banking. He has held several senior positions on the Africa Arab International Bank, and in 2008 served as the CEO of the Cairo Financial Holdings Group, a leading investment bank based in Egypt. So not only has he a good practical understanding of the financing of these projects, but also as the head of investment had a real understanding of what implementation was going to be required. I look forward to hearing his presentation and seeing him later on the panel. So I'll hand back to DMG to play the recording.
Good morning, everybody. I'm pleased and honored to be part of the Transport Evolution Africa Forum in South Africa. As an African citizen, I perceive this forum as a building block, as important building block in the African continent. The talk and the chat between the African countries the ongoing continuous chat between the African countries is instrumental cultural exchange that should take place in order to facilitate a lot of activities between the African countries. Many years ago, I'm really dreaming to see one big union, one big continent, and one big power, and one big, strong, and tight country, one gross Africa. I think we're all dreaming to see that in the coming couple of years specifically. We have big focus from different African countries to join hands in order to compete with the trade in the rest of the world. Africa is in my heart and in my color, and Egypt is the heart of Africa. Egypt is driving force, main driving force to implement the African Continent Free Trade Agreement. Egypt is a signatory on many multilateral and bilateral agreements, several multilateral and bilateral trade agreements in an effort to boost export, in an effort to boost the trade balance between African countries. In 2020, Egypt export to Africa reached 3.3 billion, representing 13% of total exports to the whole world. Actually, Egypt has been an active member in the COMESA. Finally, the president of Egypt, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, took over the chair of the COMESA, which was held in November 23rd in Egypt, which the president confirmed Egypt's commitment to achieve economic integration in the bloc, starting that Egypt will spare no effort to develop the agenda of COMESA, especially economic and regional integration. Economic and regional integration among African countries is one of the instrumental key pillar in the move of growth in the African countries. As for the African Continent Free Trade Agreement, which actually built on negotiations of the Transport Free Trade Agreement, composed of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the COMESA and the EAC, the President of Egypt asserted the country's full support for the agreement, starting that Egypt is totally ready to offer all the expertise needed and all the investment needed from private/government sectors in order to revitalize and activate the agreements. We have to definitely state that we will be facing a lot of challenges, and these challenges will rely on different aspects, like the regional economic community, which is very important, and this talk is facilitating this community cultural exchange, implementation and adjustment costs, also the structural infrastructure, industry politics, product technical specification, the role of other non-African countries, political instability, poor infrastructure needed to improve heavily, and in addition to that, red tape and bureaucracy, which is embedded into the system of most of the African countries for a very long time. However, we have key milestones in order to achieve such agreements. We have improving infrastructure is one very important pillar, and we should be all focusing on that. Not only the internal infrastructure into the country itself, but I mean here the roadmap infrastructure between the countries all over Africa in order to link countries together. Taping on digital transformation and e-commerce, we have seen that COVID-19 changed the culture in the whole world, and definitely Africa is a very important part of it. And the e-commerce is the evolving pillar and cornerstone in order to vitalize the trade between African countries, trade promotion initiatives, which is also a very important aspect. So we'll pinpoint on the improvement of infrastructure, program for infrastructure development in Africa, road network development and naval route development. These are two crucial and instrumental things, and Egypt was undertaking big program in order to improve the infrastructure between Egypt and other countries concerning road network development and concerning naval development. For the road network development, we have undertook three major initiatives. Number one, the Cairo-Cape Town Highway. The Cairo-Cape Town Highway, which is the longest, with investments close to $1.6, $1.7 billion. And the road measures around 10,000.2 kilometers from Egypt reaching Cape Town. The second is Egypt-Chad Road, which cost around $1.4 billion in investments. Also, this road is around 1,100 kilometers between Egypt to Chad. And the third one is Egypt-Libya Road, which is very important. Egypt is working on to construct 585 kilometer highway from from Saloum in western Egypt to Benghazi in eastern Libya, which will cost around $191 million. The second major initiative concerning the infrastructure is the naval route development, which is from Lake Victoria Mediterranean naval route. Egypt is looking to finalize major feasibility study to establish a naval route linking Lake Victoria and the Mediterranean through the Nile River. Egypt is leading this project with the participation of Nile Basin countries, including Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania. The projects include a navigation route, a road, a railway, and electric construction, and information cable to achieve the comprehensive development of the Nile Basin's countries. Finally, digital transformation and e-commerce will definitely play important role in order to grow the commerce between African countries, and in order to upscale the trade balance between African countries. We have two major agreements in this aspect. The e-commerce Africa, by early 2020, Egypt signed a cooperation agreement with the Universal Postal Union, UPU, and to implement the e-commerce Africa initiative, which aims to promote and develop e-commerce between African postal bodies. And this is very important, and Egypt has a lot of expertise in this area, which includes the financial inclusion that the Central Bank of Egypt is trying to play during the past 2 years. Egypt Post-Democratic Republic of Congo SCPT e-commerce cooperation protocol signed also last month with the aim to open new avenues of cooperation between Egypt and the Congo to transfer Egypt post-successful experience in achieving digital transformation and financial inclusion to Congo. Finally, we have two major trade promotion initiatives, which is Export Credit Risk Guarantee Company, which is very important in order to facilitate trade among African countries. And second thing, in Single Africa Air Transport Market, Egypt also has been supporting the Single Africa Air Transport Market, which went into effect in 2018. Finally, I don't want to stress on the importance of Africa integration in the coming 10 years at least, heading to 2030, as Africa is as one country and one strong power can affect the whole growth of the world, can be the coming market with 1.3 billion population, with GDP exceeding 3.4 trillion US dollars, and with trade from to the world's continents that could exceed the 10 trillion US dollars. So it is very important to focus into unlocking the major obstacles like infrastructure, like digitalization and e-commerce, and finally the importance of foreign direct investments among African countries is very important in order to increase and scale up the growth between the African countries. As finally, the Egypt FDI to Africa last year was around $3.3 billion. The export, was $3.3 billion, and the FDI will be reaching around $10 billion in order to play instrumental role in the growth of Africa and the development of Africa. Also, jointly with the Africa Finance Corporation and the African Development Bank, Egypt will be playing more roles in the infrastructure development of Africa during the coming 10 years. I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to such a valuable conference, for inviting me to such African talk that definitely will uplevel and upscale the growth of the African continent. Thank you very much.
We'll shortly have His Excellency join us on the panel that will be coming up to the platform shortly. We're running slightly behind time, but we should break at just after 11 o'clock for our first refreshment break. So we have a panel discussion that's going to be led by the moderator, Mr. Tao Morve. Is he available to join me on the stage, Mr. Morve? Thank you. I will do an introduction of the moderator as soon as he's made his way to the front, and then he will also introduce his panel directly to you, which will include His Excellency. Welcome. Yes, please. I'm sure many of the delegates have met Mr. Morve at various occasions during his career and his engagement with the transport sector, but I would like to take this opportunity to provide a short introduction and bio to provide a little bit of context for his session that will be coming up ahead. As you know, Mr. Morve is a distinguished leader of transport sector and served as the Chief Executive Officer for 4 of the group's divisions of Transnet and various service companies, Apron Services, transport subsidiaries, Transport National Port Authority, the TNPA, and Transport Freight. He was one of the longest serving and most experienced members of the Executive Committee of Transnet from 1997, having served as the state-owned enterprise for 15 years in various capacities and across a number of business units. He retired from this role in 2015. In 1998, going back in his history, he was fortunate to be part of the Singapore Commonwealth Advanced Summit for Chief Executives and on Public Enterprise, and this experience showed firsthand the role of the state-owned enterprises, what the role of state-owned enterprises can play in contributing and leading development and economic development in a region. This awoke in his passion of learning and development and to become more engaged with the economies of the region, and he is currently applying much of that knowledge in his role and in supporting governments in various parts of Africa. Ta has also attended as a board member on several entities, including the KwaZulu-Natal Trade Investment, the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and to be also the chairman of the Port Management Association of Eastern and Southern Africa. In November 2018, he was asked to return to Transnet as interim group chief executive officer to assist in stabilizing the entity and to provide leadership for a period of around 6 months. Tao's service to the industry and the country has been invaluable, and it is of great pleasure that we invite him to lead the moderation of this next session and to introduce his panel members. Over to you, Mr. Morvan.
Oh, thanks, Jeff. I've got a distinguished panel with me. And firstly, I would like to call Mr. Dumisani Ntuli to the stage, followed by Ms. Fazai Nyamazve. I think I saw her earlier on here. Mr. Alan Robinson. And earlier on, we saw His Excellency, Mr. Ashraf Salman, on the digital, coming via digital. We'd also have Ms. Esther Magamure. I don't know whether she's been connected or not. But before we start with this session, I wouldn't like to repeat what Ms. Eunice Ayambo went over in terms of the key objectives. But in fact, on one of the things that I wanted to touch on, His Excellency did quite well. I was actually excited that a leader within the continent can come up and say, this is what we are doing in terms of delivering. Currently, President Ramaphosa is in Abuja, and I would hope that within a short period of time, South Africa would also be able to say, this is what we are doing, this is what we have done. But let me go back to the panel, and I purposely at the beginning did not, read their bios. I think as we proceed, they'll just briefly touch on who they are, where they are from. And of course, we'll make sure that we save some time for the audience to participate in terms of asking questions. Let me start off with Mr. Ntuli, if you could just briefly give an indication. I mean, your work in the department and the department's contribution in terms of the African, free trade agreement.
No, thank you. And am I audible? Yes, I am, yeah. No, thank you so much. Well, it's a great opportunity to be here. I mean, among key players in this journey that the continent has embarked upon. And I think one's involvement in this panel is a great opportunity and a privilege to be able to come and share one's experience in specific areas that we have been active into. Well, you realize that Africa's membership is about 50% maritime. So Africa really is a maritime continent in itself. But the challenge, obviously, is the fact that the majority of its population is not along the coast, but it's hinterland, which therefore does not put maritime as a key one, as the only key player. But we need all modes to work together and cooperate. And I think I'm coming from the maritime perspective. The country has invested a lot of resources in ports infrastructure and so forth, and in policies. There's the comprehensive maritime transport policy, which I had the privilege of piloting and delivering for the state, and so we're now in the stage of implementing that moving forward. So I'm not sure how far should I, but I think for now, my involvement is in that.
Yeah, on that point, I mean, if you look at, especially on the maritime sector, short sea shopping within the continent, most traffic to and from, and I'm talking about intra-Africa trade, we do not have the capability in terms of owning shipping lines that can transport African cargo. I mean, what's your take on that in terms of the formulation of policy to enable that kind of trade?
What recent studies show that Africa's share of maritime trade will increase. You know, by 2030, we should have, I think, increased to about 7.9%. And so that on its own does not obviously tell as to in which way. It's going to be the ability of our port infrastructure to handle this increase, or it will also be driven by the growth of the Africa fleet. At the moment, we have Ethiopia as the most maritime country with the larger fleet of vessels in the whole of the continent. We are already seeing moves in countries like Kenya. They've re-established the national shipping line there. We are as well, I think, noticing the policy statement in South Africa to work towards establishing what would be referred to as a national shipping company. So there are already building blocks of initiatives by African countries to reinvest and create shipping portfolios, because Africa's import and export at the moment are carried by foreign vessels coming into the continent and taking out materials. So short sea shipping, therefore, is critical in ensuring that Africa's shipping footprint is developed and grown. I think there are recent studies that show that it is viable as long as we create proper connections, either through rail and roads, so that these goods coming from the hinterland into the coast, to the ports, reaches there in time and in good quality. So yes, indeed, there's a greater role for short sea shipping, and it's then to benefit as part of the agreement.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Fazai, North-South Corridor. Can you share with us some of the work that Transnet is doing in that regard?
Yes, sure. I think firstly to just say, echoing the sentiments on the importance of the maritime industry and connecting trade corridors as value chains, and a good example being the North-South Corridor, which connects South Africa all the way up to the DRC and the Copper Belt. We have been doing some work with the World Bank as well as the NBF, which is the NEPID Business Forum, in which we've conducted quite a number of studies to try and see how we can lower the cost of doing business on this specific corridor. And I think this is obviously in support of what we're trying to do with the FCTA. The key thing that has come out is, of no surprise, is the infrastructural challenges on the rail, as well as the lack of rolling stock to be able to actually move this freight from the mines to connect to the ports. And I think specifically what we have now started doing, and I think I just want to echo the previous speakers around the importance of government support in terms of legislation as well as institutional frameworks. One of the studies that we particularly looked at was conducting a block train that would come all the way from DRC to Durban. In order to do that, we would need quite a number of our institutions to come together from an institutional perspective. And that's particularly around open access on the rail to allow a single operator to operate the rail from the mine all the way to the port. And indeed, this would decrease our cost of doing business on the rail. So this is one of the initiatives that we looked at. The second initiative we've looked at is what can we do around increasing the rolling stock into the various operators' fleets. And that's obviously, I think, one of the key challenges is a lot of us, Transnet included, are going through quite a number of fiscal challenges. And so we are calling on to private sector in this particular case to perhaps look at programs around the revitalization of both wagons as well as locomotives, as opposed to brand new manufacturing that does take time, in which we also have a lack of capacity and capability. We are looking at programs around the rehabilitation of current stock that we have within Transnet, in collaboration with the private sector, of course, to then see how we can perhaps look at leasing arrangements into the region and be able to drive more commodities from road to rail. So these are some of the initiatives as Transnet that we've been looking at specifically, but I think one of the key challenges is, again, looking at the institutional and legislative frameworks that can support such initiatives. And this really does need that all the countries and governments come together to set up such frameworks in order for this to be successful.
Okay, I think we'll come back to rail. On the road side, Ellen, what contribution is SANRAL making towards the North-South corridor? Again, I'm talking from a South African perspective in contributing towards that.
Thanks. From a SANRAL perspective, there's two elements that we try and, which we're actually doing. It's the two main corridors are from Messina to Durban and Messina to Cape Town. As you've probably seen, the corridor between Durban and Pietermaritzburg is now currently under construction for upgrading and additional capacity. This carries on. We've then got the concession that looks all the way through to Heidelberg. There is the potential massive improvement through Van Rieenen. If we can ever get that going, it'll make a huge economic impact on transport, and that's the De Beers Pass. Going further north, we currently just put out tenders for the design of the upgrade of the 4-lane single carriageway section from Modimolle through to Polokwane. As you probably know, we've just completed the Polokwane bypass, which improves north-south, and we're about to complete the Messina bypass. So effectively, that corridor is being continually maintained, continually upgraded, ensuring there's plenty of capacity for future demand. But I think from SANRAL's perspective, we also deal and collaborate with other road agencies on the continent We have got the 20, 25 to 30 years experience in toll roads and road funding and road maintenance, not just on toll roads, but also on state toll roads. So we do collaborate with other road agencies. I think the last couple of years we've dealt with Kenya, Uganda. I have worked with others. We, obviously with the track concession, we work with A&E in Mozambique. So there is continuous collaboration, and we are available to assist where we can. I think one thing, even from a roads perspective, we also support and look forward to moving freight to rail. And I think, you know, and unfortunately I think far too often, and we're not talking about freight, I talk about passenger rail as well, and public transport in the metros. It all has to work as one system. You know, we've got to, like I mentioned it yesterday, we've got to look at how do we become more competitive on a global market? How do we make the systems more efficient so we can actually reduce costs as opposed to impose more costs because we have to do something? Funding is a huge thing, and I think I've brought it up enough times. And from a SANRAL perspective, what we've learned is funding is fairly straightforward. Well, simply put. Providing, and this is how we work, is we work on a thing called an LSR, a loan supportable by revenue. So even though a project may not be fully fundable, as long as you've got an independent, secure, long-term revenue stream, people will lend you money up to the amount that obviously that LSR tells you. So, you know, that is something that we need to sort of focus on when we look at these projects. Harmonizing a system, using each system has benefits, and instead of looking at my system as being the system and it is the best, we fully recognize the benefits of all the others.
Okay.
And I think that's what we need to go for. Thank you.
I just need to check whether His Excellency is still online.
Yes, I'm on, and I'm following up.
Because you know, what is it that you can share with your colleagues? Egypt seems to be doing quite well in terms of the implementation of the strategy. What is it that other countries, or what is it that Egypt did right that other countries can learn from you?
First of all, thank you for having me in such esteemed panel. Thank you also for my colleagues for pinpointing on very important points like the maritime as a major area and instrumental pillar for connectivity between Africa, and definitely roads as second part. But maybe I go into the discussion from different perspective, which is goes to my specialty. I think if we really need to enhance the trade balance between the African country and specifically in the African continent, then we have to have very solid investment programs among African countries. Then we have to have a study for the opportunities. As we see, most of the African countries are emerging markets, and it holds the real IRR and the real growth more than any part of the world. So we have here to undertake different approach concerning the trade balance. We have to start from the beginning, from investment, jointly with World Bank, with African Development Bank, with Africa Finance Corporation, co-investments into different countries in Africa, not only in the transportation sector, in different sectors that enhance the trade and enhance the import and export and the trade balance between the African countries. So we have, first of all, to focus together on investment into financial technology area, fintech area, and e-commerce area. This is very important area, and I see big edge for Africa to initiate such collaboration and to initiate such integration as quickly as possible, so we can go into proper e-trade commerce among each other. This is one very important thing. Second is investment into infrastructure. Here I mean electricity, roads, logistics, stevedoring, ports, all that stuff, in order to focus the FDI in the coming period in Africa, not outside Africa. Definitely, all African countries have specific FDI program, foreign direct investment program. So I think the best place to put money now in is Africa. That's what Egypt started to do in implementing the strategy, not only to collaborate with Africa, but as well to make money and to integrate into the development of Africa going forward. That's why we started with improving the infrastructure, road network development, and naval route development. In addition to that, definitely we have the three main roads, which is Cairo-Cape Town Highway, which is the longest, with direct investment of around $1.7 billion. And we have also the Egypt-Chad road, which cost around $1.4 billion. And finally, we have Egypt-Libya road, which is to construct a 585 kilometer from the western, from Saloum in the western Egypt, all the way to Benghazi in eastern Libya.
Okay, talking about the investments, I see that the banker, Ms. Esther Makamure, is waiting patiently. With all these projects, I mean, is there adequate funding to fund this project, Ms. Makamure?
Yes, yes. But let me go to priorities, because we have private investors, private businessmen also putting money in different areas in the world. So we can direct our private investors to put money in Africa, as it is the higher place for IRR and the higher place for growth as an emerging markets. So also, it is not matter of governments to put money, but government to be the locomotive of other private investors to put money with the government. Not only sovereign wealth funds or not only development funds, but as well private investors from everywhere in the country, to be directed towards opportunities in the African continent. The digital transformation and e-commerce is a hot issue too, and I think we should be focusing more on that, because this will enhance the trade between African countries, and I think we should move very quickly on that. We just signed like 2 agreements, which is the e-commerce Africa and Egypt post Democratic Republic of Congo post e-commerce cooperation protocol. And I think this kind of protocols and agreements is very important, besides the legislative framework and the integration in the FDI investment.
Okay, I see Ms. Makamure did not pick up my question, but back to the panel here.
Hello?
No, I was
Yes,
with all the projects, I mean, what's happening on the funding front, Ms. Makamure?
Thank you very much. His Honorable was still speaking, so I could not interject him. In terms of funding available, as Afreximbank, we do recognize the importance of funding for projects that will enable intra-African trade, so much that as a bank we have set up what we call our intra-African trade unit, which is specifically looking at how we can encourage the countries to trade between themselves. In terms of the projects we are looking at road connectivity, rail projects, ports, anything that will enable us as Africa to trade within herself. In terms of this, you'll find that today, as we speak, only 16% of trade is happening between Africa and herself. So as a bank, we realized that there is need to actually put more emphasis in terms of trade between Africa and herself. To this end, we are willing to partner and support countries, governments in terms of developing rail networks, developing ports, developing even roads to enable Africa to interlink to herself. Today, the bank is working on numerous projects within the regions in terms of connectivity to get the roads connection, to get the ports connected, to get the rail infrastructure in place that will need to enable trade between Africa and herself. Not only that, the bank has also set up what we call a transit guarantee facility, whose aim is to ease congestion at our borders. You'll find that at times it takes 10 days to move product between Namibia and Zimbabwe, for example. But with the transit guarantee, we aim to shorten that period to 2 days, because we will issue guarantees at the border ports, which will then enable where the trucks were supposed to stop. Because of the guarantees in place, they are able to now quickly move within those borders quickly. We have recently done a trade in South Sudan where we've actually implemented this, and it shortened that whole cycle by a total of 5 days.
Thanks. Recently, there was a headline article in one of the newspapers, 3 million graduates out of work. And you know, the question is to any of you, what do you think the role of universities should be in the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement? It seems as if there's a mismatch between skills that are being produced at universities and the skills that are required to successfully implement this. Your thoughts on that?
Well, maybe just to start off by saying that I think at the core, if I could just begin with that first, at the core of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement is the whole question of ensuring efficient services, because the aim of the agreement is to provide better products, better service for the consumers. As I've indicated, that we've got this marine highway along the Africa coast, but what links this highway is the port infrastructure, is the ports along the coast. So improving the service in those ports of vessels coming in, vessels coming out, becomes the paramount, or should become the paramount responsibility of all the countries along the coast. So I think, and there's a lot of work that South Africa is doing to improve that. I mean, the average dwell time of ships in ports is about three days in most of the African ports, and I think we need to improve that so that we are able to then ensure that goods reach their markets in time. Now, on the question of the young people, particularly because those 3 million graduates that are unemployed, I think it points to the fact that the nature of the economies of the world is changing. I think digitization is so critical. Now the question which I think the Minister of Higher Education has been concentrating on is to making sure that we develop skills of the future. E-commerce is critical, and I think businesses that are in this space have to create more opportunities for these graduates to do internships and so forth and so forth. Then I'll leave it to...
Yeah, you're thinking on that, Fazai?
I think the automatic thing that comes to us as Transnet is we have Transnet Academy that we've since just reconstituted to be a very integral part of our people. and their development. And I think what comes to mind, I think specifically personally having visited some of our marine schools here in Durban, as well as across the country, the rail, Transnet Academy Rail in Johannesburg, is that we certainly need to start to build curriculums that speak to the future. And I think the mention of technology and digitalization. But specifically, I think from our perspective, there's a big gap in manufacturing. I think we've mentioned about vessels and shipping lines, locomotives, and I think we really need to start to think about the industries and the sectors that would support the FCTA in terms of the type of skill set that would respond to an increase in trade, which is what we are expecting. And so from my perspective, I think we're doing quite a lot of work at the moment, together with some of our university institutions as well, to rebuild these curriculums, but not only for South Africa, but really for the region in Africa as well. And that's something that we will be starting to roll out in the coming future.
Okay, thanks. I see Mr. William Dax from Gautrain is online. Any thoughts on rail integration of supply chains that would contribute to the successful implementation of the free trade agreement? I don't think he heard me, but let me move to Ellen on the issue of training and matching of skills to contribute to the successful implementation of the agreement.
Thank you.
It doesn't seem to be working. I think that's the mics.
We're back. Well, SANRAL has got quite a big, spends a lot of effort on bursaries to get people through universities. And once complete, the issue engineers have is to get the right training to be able to register as a professional engineer. SANRAL has a Technical Excellence Academy which runs out of our Port Elizabeth branch office. We take in graduates and we give them hands-on design, and then site, they get seconded onto site, and that happens for a period of 3 years. They then get moved into the branches or to the regions where they actually start handling their own projects. And it's generally quite a successful way of taking people from university and making them eventually professional engineers, which make them then marketable into the industry. Thank you.
Maybe to the audience, any questions? I mean, this is such a broad topic that we need more than the allocated time. The Secretary General of PERMESA.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I would like to ask we are talking a lot about the African cabotage short sea shipping, and we see that there's positive sign of growth right now. And I would like to ask, what do you think the government should play to revolutionize the development of the African cabotage? Thank you.
Okay. I think that falls right in your lap, Mr. Ntuli. What happened to the maritime transport policy from DOT?
Yes. I think from the continent's perspective, you know that we've got an outstanding key instrument that will enable short sea shipping, and the reinvigoration of shipping in Africa. And that is the revised African Maritime Transport Charter, which South Africa, and particularly the city of Durban, had an honor of hosting a conference to have it revised. From the statistics we have, I think we are left with about 5 countries that should ratify the charter, the revised African Maritime Transport Charter. And the charter promotes clearly the development of coastal shipping and cabotage. But at a national level, we have in 2017 adopted the Comprehensive Maritime Transport Policy, which articulates clearly as to what we need to do to invest in coastal shipping. And we have currently finalized the review of the Merchant Shipping Act, which would be an instrument that would be utilized to enable coastal shipping. But coastal shipping at a domestic level is not sufficient. The idea is to negotiate an agreement, coastal shipping agreement at SADC level, and I think we foresee that there would, in the context of the Africa Free Trade Area Agreement, similar discussions from ECOWAS and COMESA. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think it's a role that PEMESA can take up. Any other question from the?
Yes, we do here at the back.
Okay.
Good day to you all. I'm Kutsunzegi, importer-exporter, managing director at Vport Trading. I'd like to pose a question to the panel regarding funding. One of the panel members spoke about LSR and how funding can be secured if there is an independent, secure, long-term income stream. And I would like to ask, how would the panel suggest that the vacuum be filled for entrepreneurs that do not have a secure income stream, but however may have a confirming offtake letter to provide imports for specific groups such as Build It, for example? What vacuum is the private sector doing to assist entrepreneurs that do not have independent, secure, long-term streams? That's my question. I hope it makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Alan, you want to talk about it? I think. And the mic is off again, so. Yeah, looks like it's back.
Yeah, I get involved in road funding, and essentially, as I say, it's quite simple. You just get this independent long term. So, in other words, that is the thing. I mean, it's like with any loan. If you want to buy a house, to get that sort of loan, you've got to have some sort of income stream. Funding works the same way, and unfortunately, for a startup company, I think that's more of a finance issue, which I am not aware of anything that, say, larger companies or even from a public sector point of view, how we help. I don't deal in that framework, so I'm not aware of it. I'm not sure if any of the other panel members who are more in the sort of financial game can answer that.
Okay, I think Ms. Makamure Esther, I don't see her on the screen. I think as the banker, she should be in a position to address that question. Esther? Yeah. Anyway, back to the current panel. I see that it's just after 11.
I think maybe I can just talk about some of the work that we are doing within Transnet. I think specifically to encourage
on the
small
funding.
businesses.
Oh, yeah,
yes.
Quickly.
Really working, of course, with some of the commercial banks is really looking into types of incubation programs for entrepreneurs and smaller startups, in which basically it's almost a conglomerate of smaller enterprises that then get funded on the basis of offtakes, for example. And so I would certainly want to recommend maybe offline to make some connections with some of the commercial banks within South Africa, specifically talking to this market and region around how our smaller enterprises and entrepreneurs can be supported. But it is certainly something, I think, from a state-owned enterprise perspective, that is one of our mandates, specifically in the energy or oil and gas space, where we are starting to look at how we can bring in a lot of the players into the market given the current situation. So that is what I would encourage that we do. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks. Over to you, Jeff. But
Mr. Moray, we have one more question, please.
Oh, one more question.
Thank you.
Adding to the conference organizers, this is a conference topic on its own, you know, for future conferences. Where's the question coming from?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mzomandla Sosibo from the South African Maritime Safety Authority. I'm not sure if it's a question, but it may link the two. We've had a crisis around the issue of unemployed graduates. And I think it's getting into every agenda to say we've got an over-distribution of skills, but that cannot be absorbed by the market. My then take is to say, for example, a question that we perhaps need to look into. How do you then begin to transition between unemployed graduates and entrepreneurs, so that we take off a certain number of those to start coming up as entrepreneurs? Of course, the question will link to the question from Khotso around the issue of funding then, because if you want to then move an unemployed graduate into an entrepreneurship, there has to be a support system. And perhaps it's a time that we look into that, saying when they get graduate, they inquire or they get some soft skills around business management, so that they don't necessarily get out of the universities to look for the job, but they get into the system to initiate and getting out of the university and become employers themselves. I think we need to move away from producing employees from our education system. It's time that we look into an education system that is able to produce potential employers instead, because this thing of unemployed graduate has been there for quite some time now. And that simply means there's a gap somewhere in terms of what we are producing and what the market is requiring. But we should be able to then at least influence the curriculum to produce people that can be able to be entrepreneurs instead of job seekers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moray, and the panel, those that are on the stage with us. Thank you very much for contributions, as well as the panelists that came in via the digital platform. As you've said, Mr. Moray, there's quite a few topics here that could individually have a panel discussion on. I'd like to end it here and break for our refreshments. As you're aware, we have the coffees and teas through in the other room. There is a COVID procedure. Please put your masks on and make sure you follow those processes. And we're going to return to start again here at 11:30, so it'll give us just under 30 minutes for a refreshment break. Thank you very much, Mr. Moray, for moderating, and thank you to the panel. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Where do we switch up this thing?